Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa, where we'll be taking a special look at Chad. Its president of 3 decades has died of wounds on the front lines of a battle with rebels. There are concerns that Idriss Deby's death could lead to local and regional instability. So, Chad's president, Idriss Deby, has been killed battling rebels in the north. News of his death came just hours after he was declared the winner of elections, which would have given him another 6 years in power. The 68-year-old led the country for 30 years and was one of the continent's longest-serving rulers. He survived several rebellions and coup attempts whilst heading up a military regime. Despite his autocratic rule, he was a key ally to Western nations in the fight against extremism in the Sahel. Many will now be hoping that Deby's death will not push counter-terrorism efforts off course.
A shock announcement from Chad's top military commander, with news that the president had been killed during clashes with rebels.
Idriss Deby Itno vient de donner son dernier souffle en défendant l'intégrité territoriale sur le champ de bataille. C'est avec une profonde amertume que nous annonçons au peuple tchadien le décès ce mardi 20 avril 2021 du maréchal du Tchad, Idriss Deby Itno, des suites de ses blessures au front.
The announcement came just hours after Deby had been officially declared the winner of this month's presidential election. His supporters had gathered in the capital to hear his victory speech, but were told he'd instead gone to visit soldiers fighting on the front lines. Rebel groups based in neighbouring Libya have crossed into Chad and are thought to be advancing south towards the capital. A close ally of France and other Western powers, the exact circumstances of Deby's death have not been independently verified. But one of the rebel leaders had this to say to France 24's sister station, RFI.
He came to the battle. This fight was of a rare violence. This violence indicated his presence, and we attacked him. He was injured. He was there at the front as a military chief. And when we saw that he was fighting, we understood that he was there.
One of Africa's longest-serving leaders, Deby had faced repeated insurgencies and survived numerous armed rebellions during his 3 decades in power. With the government and parliament dissolved, a military council is now set to govern Chad for the next 18 months.
Well, the Chadian rebel group advancing south through Chad from Libya has said that it rejects the appointment of Deby's son, Mohamed Idriss Deby, as interim president. The Front for Change and Concord in Chad, or FACT, have been moving on the capital, N'Djamena, but appear to have been slowed by the military about 300 kilometres out. Despite government reassurances, much is unclear about rebel positions, and several nations, including the US and the UK, have advised nationals to leave. Since Deby's death, the government and National Assembly have been dissolved and a nationwide curfew brought in. More widely, Libya, Niger, Nigeria, Sudan, South Sudan, and Central African Republic, almost all of Chad's neighbours suffer from civil war, jihadist violence, or chronic insecurity. There are real concerns about what instability in Chad could mean for the region. Deby was a career soldier who won support from Western powers, in part by his command of an army that could be relied on. Chadian troops are garrisoned in Niger and were deployed to Nigeria in 2019 to help fight Boko Haram insurgents, which were stepping up cross-border attacks. Our Sam Olokoya tells us more.
Nigerians are hailing Idriss Deby as a president who died fighting for his people. Nigerians are highly surprised that he died during combat. A year ago, he led Chadian troops to confront members of the Nigerian jihadist group, Boko Haram. The fighting took place around the Nigerian-Chadian border, and many Nigerians followed it very keenly. Chadian authorities said about 1,000 Boko Haram fighters were killed in the course of the fighting. The Chadian authorities released videos showing dead Boko Haram fighters as a show of their victory. Some of these videos also show Idriss Deby in the midst of troops. It was the most humiliating experience for Boko Haram and its leader, Abubakar Shekau. In desperation, Abubakar Shekau released a video urging his fighters not to flee from the Chadian troops. Sounding very conciliatory, he begs Chadian authorities to stop the attacks. The attacks highlight Chad's role under Idriss Deby in Nigeria's fight against Boko Haram. In the Lake Chad region, Chadian and Nigerian troops have been jointly combating Boko Haram fighters under the platform of an international task force. Many Nigerians see the death of President Idriss Deby as a major blow to Nigeria's fight against Boko Haram.
So, Sam, they're giving us a little bit more of an insight into just what a key player Idriss Deby was regionally. For more on this, we're joined by Nathaniel Powell, who's a researcher from the War and Diplomacy Institute. Nathaniel, thanks very much for speaking to me. First of all, why is Deby's passing of such international concern? Nathaniel, I think you need to take your side. I think you might be on mute. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a bit more about why there's such international concern about the death of Idriss Deby.
Right. So there's basically two concerns that, say, French or American policymakers would have. One is that this would lead to a reduction in Chadian military support for ongoing military operations by Opération Barkhane or the G5 Sahel in their campaigns against jihadist groups in the Sahel, and in which Chadian troops are playing an important role. And the other is that there's a fear that one of the worst-case outcomes in Chad itself could be a prolonged political crisis that could result in a civil war in Chad itself, which could add to the cascading instability that is seen throughout the Sahel. And these are probably the two largest or most important concerns among French and American policymakers, as well as other international interveners.
So Chad's already facing a rebel insurgency. Where do things stand with that fact advance at the moment? And what is it exactly that they want? Right. So right now, information is very confused and contradictory. So I don't have any kind of extra information to bring to the table about where the military situation stands. What I can say is that the fact itself, the rebel group that was fighting with the Chadian army just yesterday has said that they've operated a strategic withdrawal. That's the words they use, strategic withdrawal into northern Chad, which suggests that Chadian government claims that they were defeated on the battlefield, at least temporarily, are probably accurate. The other issue is kind of what they're aiming for. Well, their initial aim is to get rid of Deby, but their communique suggests that they, at least on paper, want not just political change, but are supportive of civil society elements that want a democratic Chad. Now, the problem is the leadership of this rebel group is not particularly known for their history of support for democracy. So whether that kind of rhetoric is just rhetoric or represents an honest felt desire to change Chad's politics for the better is an open question. So what happens now? Deby's son has been named interim leader. Is that likely to lend itself to stability?
Well, that's, again, it's an open question, but the fact that his son has been named leader and the fact that he was kind of Deby's, it was well known among Chadians, but also outside observers that Mohammed Idriss Deby, his son, was the kind of designated successor, the Dauphin of Deby's rule. So for a long time, the main political question in Chad, or one of the main political questions, is what happens after Deby dies, what happens after he goes, and all fingers kind of pointed to his son as being the main kind of successor. The problem is, does he maintain the same loyalty in the army that his father does? He was the head of the Presidential Guard. He has a lot of military experience. He has a lot of personal connections to France and the United States through his training abroad and his connections with foreign military officers. And he commanded Chadian troops in Mali, so he has that experience behind him. The question is, the question is twofold. Does this mean that the regime will continue to act as before? And if that's the case, it implies a stability at the top, but it does imply continued repression and divide and rule tactics against the democratic opposition, as well as probably fueling further rebellions in the future. Also, the way that Deby's son came to power is unconstitutional, which means it is technically a military coup d'etat. So the question is, what happens at the international level? Does France condemn the way this happened? Does the AU condemn the way this happens? Because this does violate the Constitution. which suggests that when the president dies, the head of the National Assembly is supposed to take his place until new elections are organized. And this adds to the uncertainty and adds to the potential instability of the country going forward.
And just quickly, Nathaniel, you touched upon that kind of dichotomy there. Deby had a very stellar military record, but when it comes to other aspects of the way that he led the country, that was less admirable. Tell us a little bit about that.
Certainly. So Deby has Deby's been in power for 30 years, and the tactics or strategies he's been using to rule the country involve brutal repression of opponents, including the physical elimination, the murder of former opposition leader Ibn Salah, and as well as just recently in the most recent election, there was an attack against one of his opponents, where the mother of the presidential candidate was actually killed. So there is a clear instance of intimidation, arresting opponents, also dividing and ruling. So basically finding potential enemies and co-opting them into his regime or exiling them, and occasionally bloody counterinsurgency. And the actual practice, his troops are known to be very effective in the battlefield, but that's only kind of one part of his military. The other part of his military are kind of co-opted former rebels who are not always particularly well treated or well paid and could potentially revolt in the future. And the good part of his army, the one that's effective in the battlefield, also has a very consistent record of human rights abuses, not just in Chad, but elsewhere in the Central African Republic, very recently in Mali and Niger, where there have been very credible accusations of rape, and in Mali also, where there are accusations of mass killings of civilians. So this is an army that doesn't hesitate to use excessive amounts of force in order to keep its regime in power, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Thanks very much, Nathaniel Powell there speaking to us.
Thank you.
Well, despite his dictatorial rule, Deby's importance to regional security has attracted international tribute and expressions of shock at his passing. Shirley Sitburn has more.
In one day, Chadians saw President Idriss Deby Itno go from winning a sixth contested term to being declared wounded on the battlefield and dead.
Parce que là, du point de vue sécuritaire, le président a joué un rôle important. Et là, déjà, il y a ces qui menacent, il y a des remous qui commencent par de gauche à droite. Et là, nous inquiétons franchement de cette disparition subite.
Circumstances around President Deby's death are still unclear. On Monday, the army announced a victory in a battle against insurgents. The next day, with the president dead, they've taken control of the transition process, replacing the late president with his son. The Chadian constitution says that when a president dies, the Speaker of the Senate guarantees the transition. In Paris, Chadian opposition supporters called on the international community to press the military to transfer power to civilian leaders.
Nous ne pouvons pas accepter que son fils puisse succéder à son père. Et c'est pourquoi nous voulons vraiment appeler la communauté internationale à sortir de son silence, à prendre position sur la situation actuelle.
Back in N'Djamena, the army is now deployed. Chad's borders are closed.
Well, that's it for our Eye on Africa special on the death of Chadian President Idriss Deby. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.